and welcome to CMEC's podcast from Manama, where CMEC is at the 21st IISS Manama Dialogue. It seems that we're very seldom at a Manama Dialogue where there are not major events and extremely turbulent times surrounding us, and this year is no different. We meet at a time when the Gaza ceasefire is holding, fragile but holding. Questions hang over the nature and future of Syria. Concerns are expressed over stability in Lebanon, and we look at a Gulf which is looking at evolving security alliances, and we look, of course, at the continuing changing role of the US in the world and President Trump's impact and achievements. I'm Charlotte Leslie, I'm Director of the Conservative Middle East Council, and during this conference I will be speaking to a number of delegates on their views of what we're seeing in the world today.
Hi, I'm Iain Lindsay, a former British ambassador to Bahrain and now an advisor to His Royal Highness Crown Prince Salman bin Hamad Al Khalifa, the Prime Minister of Bahrain.
Iain, we're meeting at the 21st Manama Dialogue. Can you explain briefly the importance of a gathering like this?
Well, I think twofold. Obviously, from a Bahraini perspective, here we have a major international strategic, geopolitical security conference taking place here, as you said, for the 21st time. Very much one of the key events in the whole region. And invariably, it's always timely. There's always things that are happening in the region that make this gathering of people from all over the world really important. This year it's a fantastic turnout and really great to see that. And maybe reflecting the fact that this is actually an extraordinarily good time to be talking about not only what has happened over the last 6 months to a year, but actually what I think we start to look rather more optimistically about where the region is going. And that then maybe segues then into the point about it's actually good for the region that we've actually got so many people coming in here at this time to be talking about what next in Gaza, what next in the Gulf and in terms of regional security.
And at date of recording, we're the 1st of November, and it's been quite a year, hasn't it?
Well, it has been, and I think if you think about the fact that this year our neighbour Qatar got hit by rockets from Israel and Iran, and I think back in June when the Iranian rockets hit Qatar, I was actually in China at a World Economic Forum event, and with my colleagues from Bahrain, we were really worrying about what on earth's going to happen next. Here we are, 5 months later, and how significantly things have changed on the ground in the region, and I think also where we're going to be going to from here. I think we can be reasonably optimistic about the path ahead. Obviously, what's happening in the Levant, Gaza, and Palestine with Israel, that's one element. And then, of course, Iran in this region. And this is, I think, I think we can be cautiously optimistic that things are on the up here. And that's actually, this region is on fire in any case economically. But if we then see that we've actually got a significant amount of stability throughout the whole of the Middle East, that then enables this region to prosper even more. And that's what we're hoping for.
And what would you say are the top priorities, both here in Bahrain and in the region, for ensuring that this tentatively upward trajectory is maintained?
I think the priority for Bahrain, the priority for the region, I think is pretty much the same. Stability, peace and stability. I think it's really, given the very close relationship between Bahrain and the United States, and also a close relationship that our neighbours have with the United States, the very fact that the US, and do remember the first place that Trump came to overseas after he took over was the Gulf. Riyadh, Qatar, Abu Dhabi. King Hamad, Crown Prince Salman went to see him in Riyadh. I think that indicates the importance that the Americans attach to the Gulf countries. And therefore, with what Trump has done, from our perspective, that reinforces the relationship with the United States and the United States' leading role in peace, security, stability in the Middle East, notwithstanding what we heard last night from Tulsi Gabbard about America first, if you like. The reality is that the Americans, we have seen a significant change in the last few months because of what the Americans and Trump has done. That is good for the Gulf Arabs because we're on the same wavelength. And that reinforces, I think also particularly, thinking again of the Iranian question, and there were a few questions this morning in the session about, whether Iran, what's happening there. The very fact that the Americans have come in with a security guarantee for Qatar, and we hear that the Saudis may be looking for the same. I don't know whether that's true or not. This is good news for the Gulf. I remember when I was here 10 years ago, the big talk then was the pivot away from the Middle East towards East Asia. Now, we also do know that there is the importance of East Asia, the South China Sea, China, etc. But the reality is the Americans have made a significant difference here in changing the dynamics of this region, I guess, since January. And I also think the Bahrainis maybe particularly now feel that, we have an American administration, as was the case in Trump 1, that really cares. Crown Prince had a fantastic visit to Washington in the summer. So I think our relationship with the US is in a good place. I think the region's relationship, the GCC's relationship with the US is in a good place. And, at the end of the day, certainly here in Bahrain, stability is a prerequisite for prosperity. And prosperity is key for us, creation of jobs and prosperity in Bahrain. When we're not having to worry about what may be happening tomorrow or next week in terms of people attacking other people, that makes a massive difference. The ability to then to focus on prosperity for people here and obviously throughout the Gulf.
Iain Lindsay, thank you very much indeed.
I'm Shayan Talabani. I'm a senior analyst at the Tony Blair Institute, and I work on the Middle East, specifically on the Levant and Iraq.
So not a lot going on then. We're coming to the end of the 21st Manama Dialogue. What are your key takeaways, and are there things that haven't been covered that you think we could have talked about a bit more?
I mean, it's been, I think, a really fascinating dialogue, and it comes at a very important time. The Manama Dialogue's always a fantastic opportunity, I think, for all the regional stakeholders to come together and do their bilaterals, but also for us as analysts, people like me as an analyst, to kind of come and get a feel for what the takeaways are from those rooms and what they bring to the sessions. In general, I think, in a way, I see it as I'm quite optimistic on the one hand. It feels like there's a lot of momentum at this point in time, particularly when it comes to the Levant, on Syria, on Lebanon, certainly on Palestine, to use this opportunity to get things moving in the region. And we heard from, Dr. Anwar Gargash, we heard from Dr. Manal Radwan from Saudi Arabia, from the new the interim Syrian Foreign Minister Shaybani this morning, and of course, the Palestinian Foreign Minister, and it seemed like, almost quite. It seemed like they were all aligned, which is really refreshing. Particularly after having, decades of sort of instability in the Levant being the sort of nexus of where all the bad things happen, to have that sense of alignment from a lot of the key regional players. But at the same time, I think there's still a lot of work to be done, and there wasn't a lot on sort of how you get the things, not just within the states, progressing, so not just on sort of regional integration and economic integration from a regional sense, but also within the states. So when we're talking about countries like Syria, when we're talking about Lebanon, how do we really get the inter-Lebanese, the inter-Syrian dynamics at that point of stability that can help with the wider region's stability? And also, I also work on Iraq, and I think Iraq is also not immune to a lot of the changes that have happened in the region over the last couple of years. We've seen what's happened in Lebanon, we've seen the massive shift, of course, in Syria. Iraq is sort of this odd place that sits between the Gulf and the Levant. But it's not immune to the shifts in neighboring Syria, of course in Iran. It's not immune to the wider dynamics post-October 7th in the region. And it feels a little bit like, at this point in time where we're looking to elections in Iraq very soon, it's sort of the calm before the storm. So I would have liked to have seen a little bit more on that, but otherwise it's been a really interesting and really fascinating Manama Dialogue.
Now, one of the key themes to emerge has been countries' self-determination, but also self-determination of people for their own country as opposed to external influences. There's a recognition that in transition, particularly in Gaza, there will need to be an international security force. I'm going to ask you, you work at the Tony Blair Institute, and Tony Blair's name is a name that is very associated with changes. How do you see not only the Tony Blair Institute but other external organisations interacting in the region, and is that a good influence, or do we need to focus more on in-country autonomy?
I mean, I think for those of us who work on the region and know the region, it's always going to be, the primary message is always going to be that anything that comes about in terms of managing transitionary periods in all of the region, in the Levant, in Palestine, when it comes to Gaza, when it comes to Syria, when it comes to Lebanon, has to be led by Palestinians, Lebanese, Syrians. And I don't think that there isn't a role for, external actors, because the reality is of course, as much as the first primary stop should be to work with those in country and those who are leading their countries forward, the Levant is still a region that's very, very porous. Its borders are very porous. There are many actors who are external actors who are engaged, both, state and non-state actors that cross the border lines, and also, of course, corporations and businesses, which critically are going to be the way to reconstruct this part of the region as well, when we look at Syria, when we look at the damage that's been inflicted in Gaza. So, of course, there's a role, but I think the primary message is that it has to be led, of course, by the people in country. And that's sort of the sensible answer, but I also think it's the right answer.
Finally, just back to Iraq, which you mentioned. For Iraq watchers and for our listeners, what would be the key things that you'll be looking out for and the key questions you'd be asking about Iraq in the coming year?
So, of course, Iraq is really unique in a sense that it is a democracy in the region. And for better or for worse, I think a lot of the countries, its neighbours at least, have sort of accepted that it's a democracy, which is interesting and I think is quite important. But the benefits that have come with that democracy, I mean, one of them is that Iraq does hold elections on time. And also there is a relative freedom of expression that Iraqis themselves in the country have done a really good job of preserving and protecting. So, this pre-election period is always really fun because you see sort of the satirical, very characteristic Iraqi humor really come out in full force. And that's something that's really worth nurturing. But also when it comes to the elections themselves, like I said, I mean, they always happen on time, but the real question in Iraq is normally what happens after the elections. And the process of forming a government is usually a very lengthy process and a very complex one. And that's when you get all the different external and internal actors really, lobbying and really, doing these sort of their deals under the table to form the next government. I think this time around, the thing to watch is that there's a lot of pressure from the outside, particularly from the United States, particularly from the Trump administration, who's just appointed, Trump has just appointed a new envoy for Iraq, Mark Savaya, to not allow for that process to become really long and lengthy and complex, to the extent that it hinders the formation of a government and hinders Iraq's progression, because Iraq has been doing very well economically. It's enjoyed a lot of political economic stability in the last few years. It's quite unrecognizable for those who haven't been, since the mid 2000s or the early 2000s, and it's really on the right track. But it's also in a very sensitive position, neighboring Iran, being part of the wider Levant, GCC nexus, balancing its relationships with the United States. So my hope is that, all of the players will come together and decide that it's important to preserve that stability and that economic and political stability that it's managed to maintain over the last few years, and keep that positive momentum going for Iraq and for Iraqis.
Shayan Talabani, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you so much, Charlotte. Always a pleasure.
Hi, Charlotte. My name is Ibrahim Hamidi. I am the editor-in-chief for Majalla. It's a Arab global current affair magazine. I'm based in London, so I am Syrian British journalist, political analyst.
So we're meeting at the Manama Dialogue in November 2025, and it's been quite a year, hasn't it, particularly for Syria?
Absolutely. I mean, it was a quite year, especially for Syria. I remember last year we were here. Last year, Manama Dialogue was held on 7th of December. That date, it's went to the history, because that day we were witnessing from here, from Manama, the collapse of the Syrian regime. So I remember I had to go out from the room all the time to speak to the people on the ground in Damascus, to speak to some colleagues, friends on Doha Forum, so to try to understand what was happening in Syria and what could happen. Now, it's completely, Syria has changed since then and now. So now, as you know, we have some high-level Syrian officials from the new Syrian regime. We have the head of Syrian intelligence, Hussein Salami, and we are having the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Syria, Asad al-Shibani. It's remarkable change that to less than a year, no one from the Syrian government was here, and now we have a few high-level top officials attending this forum and representing the new Syrian government.
There have obviously been a huge number of changes, but there are still significant remaining concerns over the new regime in Syria. What would you say to those people who are having very serious doubts about engaging with the new Syrian regime?
Definitely, I totally understand where they are coming from. Of course, you have a lot of questions and challenges ahead. Things could be better, definitely, but things could have been worse, definitely. So as analysts, we need to see the real picture, and as politicians, diplomats need to push and help the Syrian regime, the new Syrian government, to make things better. And as some participants, high-level participants said here, and Syria is a success story, and we have to work very hard to make it a success, and because the failure is a disaster to Syria, to the Syrians, to the region, and to the whole world, because you will have then a lot of problems coming out from Syria, question of terrorism, question of refugees, question of drugs and Captagon, and question of migration. So, as I said, things could be better and should be better, but things could have been worse, and we should not neglect the challenges ahead of us. We should work very hard together to address those challenges and to improve the situation in Syria and to prevent the worst scenario to happen in Syria.
And finally, what do you think have been the main impact, what have been the main ramifications of the fall of the Assad regime, looking at greater regional power struggles, structures, Shia crescent, and those kind of dynamics?
We know that a lot of analysts, a lot of experts, journalists could say that the defeat of Hezbollah in Lebanon was a major blow to Iran and to the axis of resistance led by Iran. But I think I am one of the people who believe actually the big blow to the big defeat for Iran and the axis of resistance led by Tehran is the collapse of the Syrian regime. With the collapse of Assad regime, Iran being defeated, Hezbollah being weakened because the whole supply of arms to Hezbollah, the route being cut. 3, the Captagon networks being Captagon meaning drugs networks being dismantled. In addition to that, now we have a partner in Damascus that we can work with to fight ISIS. So in terms of geopolitics, I think since 7th of October, there's several developments in the region. We had the defeat of Hezbollah, we had the defeat of Hamas, and Iran being targeted by the Israelis. But for me, the major change was and is the collapse of Assad regime in terms of geopolitical shift. Now, the whole shift in the whole balance in the region has shifted. not in favor of Iran and the axis of resistance led by Iran.
Ibrahim Hamidi from Majalla, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you so much, Charlotte. It's always a pleasure to see you.